Do things like cameras and lights really matter when it comes to making YouTube videos? If your message is strong and you're reasonably talented, isn't that enough? Well, not exactly, in my opinion. In this video, I'll share with you some of the equipment that I use to make my videos and my underlying philosophy about the importance of gear in order to be successful on YouTube. I'm taking 7 weeks of Tuesdays to go slightly off topic on my Beat Diabetes channel and talk about how I make my videos and some of the equipment that I use, and the philosophy and history behind the channel. In today's video, I'll be discussing cameras, lights, and sets. But before we get into the actual equipment I use, I want to share with you a kind of analogy which explains the importance and the non-importance of video production gear. All across our country, we have churches. I've been to quite a few of them, and I've preached in quite a few of them. Almost every church has at the back a sound booth where they have an audio guy whose job it is to keep the audio working properly, to make sure that the right mics are on at the right time, to deal with that terrible feedback sound immediately, and to adjust the volume of the sound system so that it's neither too loud or too soft. Now, if this sound guy does his job well, nobody notices him or even thinks about him. Their focus is on the preacher, on the choir, or whatever's happening at the front of the church. The sound guy at the back is essentially invisible. He's not seen and never thought of. And when people are driving home from church, they're almost never talking about how well the audio engineer did that day. They might be talking about how good or how terrible the sermon was, or how beautiful the choir sang, or how poorly, but they almost never have long conversations about the audio guy at the back of the church in his little audio box. But if something goes wrong with the sound, if the preacher's mic stops working, or if there's a terrible loud feedback, suddenly the audio guy at the back has everybody's attention. In fact, most of the church will turn around and look at the sound booth and the audio guy and wonder what's going on and why he hasn't fixed the problem already. The sound guy is no longer invisible. In fact, he has become the most visible person in the church. Now, this is, in my opinion, the role that audio and video gear and lighting play in the production of YouTube videos and even television shows. If the quality of the video is reasonably good, nobody pays attention to it. They may like or hate the show or what's being said or the poor or the great acting, but how many people after watching a TV show have a conversation where they criticize the cameras or the mics that were used? When it comes to making YouTube videos, the goal should be, in my opinion, to make the video and audio and lighting good enough so that they're ignored and people will focus on the message of the video and not the quality. People rarely criticize me for the technical quality of the videos I produce, and they rarely compliment me either on it, although I do get a few compliments here and there. But mostly people will compliment me or criticize me on what I have to say, and that's how it should be. If you're going to make YouTube videos, my advice would be get your videos up to a level that the quality of the video becomes a non-issue, and your videos are going to stand or fall on your message and not on what cameras you use or how expensive your microphones are. Well, with that as a background, let's talk about some of the equipment I use. The main thing people think about in video production is, of course, the cameras. And I do use somewhat expensive cameras, not because I must have pristine video, but because of the tremendous advantage it is to use a 4K camera rather than an HD camera. And it's not really what you think. It's not because your video quality is going to look all that much better on YouTube than if you filmed in HD. The end product won't be that much more impressive, especially since over half the people that watch YouTube are watching on their cell phones. But there are some definite advantages to recording in 4K. Let's take a look at the original video I shot a while back when I was interviewing my wife Benedicta while dropping her off at the airport to fly to Nigeria to coordinate our mission there. This was a very quick setup and interview that we did. I didn't have the opportunity to set up lights. I didn't adjust any settings. I just placed Ben's large purse on top of her carry-on in front of us, put the camera on fully automatic, and started recording. And this is what that camera recorded.
We find ourselves in the Dallas DFW airport, and it is headed for where? Nigeria, home country.
Pretty awful, huh? Actually, there were 3 major flaws with this recording, and there were 2 things about it that were pretty good. On the negative side, the camera wasn't level, which looks really bad. Second, there was way too much headroom. That is, too much space above our heads, which looks totally unprofessional. And of course, third, the audio was absolutely terrible. On the positive side, the lighting was great, and the focus was dead on. The camera's autofocus feature absolutely nailed it on this interview and never lost focus, and we were sitting in front of a large window which provided all the light we needed. The auto brightness of the camera again did its job well, and the lighting was great. But what about those 3 problems? The audio I was able to fix because of the mic I used, which was also recording its own audio file. On the computer at home, I substituted the mic recorder file for the camera's audio file, and the problem was solved. The problems of an unlevel video and way too much headroom were fixed pretty easily as well, and the reason they could be fixed as nicely as they were was because I was using a 4K camera. The video it records has such high resolution that you can zoom way in on a video later on the computer and still have very sharp, crisp video. So when I worked with this interview file on the computer, I simply zoomed it in to remove a lot of that overhead space, and this also enabled me to rotate the video to where it was level. The finished product of that interview looked like this. Well, once again, we find ourselves at the Dallas DFW airport, and Benedicta is headed for where?
Nigeria.
Nigeria, her home country. Again, here is the original file.
Again, we find ourselves in the Dallas DFW airport, and it is headed.
And here is the finished product. Well, once again, we find ourselves at the Dallas DFW airport. Now, if I had not been recording in 4K, I could not have zoomed in that much and kept the video looking sharp. It would have been fuzzy. Here's another example of the power of zooming in with 4K video. In this video, Benedicta and I are standing in front of a camera talking about the Nigerian diet in Nigeria. I recorded this interview from some distance, but to make the video more interesting, I zoomed it in on the computer, and it looked like this.
Don't have blood sugar problem, it's okay.
Well, American soup, some people think soup is bad for diabetics. It a lot of times is because... Now, the 2 shots were from the same original camera recording, the same video file. But had I recorded that interview in HD, I could never have zoomed in that far and kept the video that clear and sharp. So using a 4K video camera really does make a big difference. When I started the Beat Diabetes channel, I was using HD cameras, and they did a good job, but I simply couldn't zoom very far in without losing quality. So after a while, I did some research, and we purchased 3 4K cameras. 2 of the cameras were identical, and this is one of them. This is the Pansasonic Lumix G85 model, and it has worked beautifully for me. I just love it. Now, there are a lot of 4K cameras, but this particular model had another feature I desperately wanted. Most video cameras you buy these days, especially the DSLR types, have a limitation on how long they'll shoot video. Some of them will turn themselves off after only 15 minutes of recording. Some will do it after 30 minutes, and that was just totally unacceptable to me. And second, many DSLRs will not only have a time limit, but even during the time they record video, they'll break that file into several different files. I wanted a camera that took nice, clean, sharp video and recorded as long as I needed it to record and didn't break the files into a bunch of little pieces. And the truth is, there really aren't that many cameras that do this. But the Pansasonic Lumix G85 will record as long as your battery and your SD card will allow you. And at the end, you'll have exactly one file, not 4, 5, or 10, but one file. So this was perfect for me, and it checked all the boxes. Additionally, it has a touch screen which allows me to focus the camera with a swipe of my finger, and that's pretty cool. Now, the one thing on this camera that is weak is the autofocus, and that's where this other camera excels, and this also is a Panasonic. It's the FZ1000, or you would call it the FZ1000 if you're British. This camera has a much stronger autofocus, and in fact, it can do a great job set on fully automatic. This was the one I used in the airport with Ben. So when I'm in a hurry and I don't have time to adjust different settings, I just put this baby on full automatic, hit the record button, and we're off and running. Now, the problem with this camera is that it does have a 30-minute recording limit, and it does break that 30 minutes of recording into several smaller files. So I don't like that, but at times it's worth it, and it serves me well in certain situations, especially when I'm in a hurry and I need it on fully auto, and it does the job well. And it also does pretty well in low light. Well, let's talk about lighting. Now, I'm probably going to disappoint some of you because I don't use fancy, latest, cutting-edge LED lights. I use babies like these. These are fluorescent lights with the circular coil type of bulb. This is old school, but then I'm an old guy, so I like old school stuff, right? No, actually, there's a couple of reasons why I use these. Number one, they work. And why should I spend a whole lot more money on more expensive lights when these things work fine? They would be a lot more of a hassle to travel with, but these stay right here in this little studio room, and they work just fine. In fact, they work better than LEDs in one respect, and that is they keep the skin tones better. To me, LEDs tend to redden skin tones. And I've always had kind of reddish eyes anyway, and they make my eyes look even redder and make me look like some kind of an alien freak. So the LEDs do. But these do a little better, and they're more accurate with skin tone, in my opinion. Now, maybe I just haven't used LEDs that were expensive enough. I do have some LED lights. I just don't use them. I like these. They work. So that's what I use. Now, one thing you'll notice is that they're very close to where I sit or where I'm going to stand. I mean, I do not have these far away. When I first started doing YouTube videos, I had them seem like a mile away. And I don't know why I did that. I just assumed you wouldn't want lights right up in close. But as I watched other guys talking about lighting and experimented a little myself, I realized that the closer you can get those lights to you, the better off you are, and your camera will get a better shot. So the lights are close, and fluorescent really does the job for me, and I'm not going to change, at least don't plan to. Maybe someday I will. I do have one pet peeve about lighting, something that bugs me a little bit. Some of the YouTube guys that talk a lot about lighting, they insist on three-point lighting, where you're going to have a hair light from behind shining on your head, you're going to have a key light and a fill light, and I find there's no reason for that. And another thing they usually want to do is they want to light up half of your face bright and have the other half of your face dark. They do that because apparently somebody decided that's just the natural way, and they saw Humphrey Bogart with a half-lit face in one of his film noir movies, and they want to be like Humphrey Bogart. Well, I actually doubt that's true, but still, they want that movie look. Well, I admit, in real life, our faces are not perfectly lit, and usually one side of the face is going to be lit more than the other. But guess what, folks? YouTubers are not making movies. We're just making YouTube videos, and many of them are just silly little YouTube videos, but even the important ones, there's no reason to look like Humphrey Bogart in a film noir movie. We can, you know, if you look at the news anchors, they're well lit from one side to the next. But some people are determined that they're going to have that one side dark and that one side light, and if you'll forgive me for saying it, that's just plain silly. Well, we've talked about cameras, we've talked about lighting, we've got one more thing to talk about, and that is, what are you going to have behind you? Obviously, you got to have something behind you when you're doing a video. And one of the things that I determined when I started doing the YouTube videos was I wanted a nice library scene behind me. It makes me going to make me look scholarly, and it just seems like a very attractive thing to have behind you. So I don't have a big library. I've got actually quite a few books, but they're scattered in different bookcases and boxes and so forth. Nothing that looks like this. So what I did was I acquired the rights to a picture of a library through one of the photo stock sites, and I blurred it intentionally before I sent it off to a company called Owings Originals. They make backdrops based on the picture you send them. And this particular one is almost feels like a blanket. It's soft and it doesn't wrinkle easily, which is a very, very nice thing. And this is my library background. When I'm doing a book review or if I'm just sitting in front of this table talking to you, this is what you're probably going to see. I remember I made one video where I shot it in 2 or 3 segments, and I forgot to put the same backdrop up, and so I had the library part of the time, and the other part was this, which is my other main backdrop. And this is the kitchen backdrop. Obviously, we do recipes, we talk about food, we talk about diets, so sometimes I want a kitchen behind me. And this is my kitchen. No, it's not a real kitchen. If you want to see our real kitchen, it's right here. This is our real kitchen. You don't see this in too many videos. You might see me opening the oven and putting something in and taking something out, but normally what you see is our fake kitchen. But this is real. It's not a backdrop, it's real. This is where Benedicta makes me marvelous okra soup. So this is our studio kitchen. You may say, well, your real kitchen looks pretty nice. Why don't you just use that? It would be way too much trouble to be moving the lights and the tripods and the cameras and the microphones all down into that kitchen and shooting a kitchen scene and then move it all back upstairs to this studio. So it's a lot simpler just to have this on the wall, and I can drop the library down and do the kitchen and put it back up and do the library. So these are my 2 primary backdrops. They were not cheap, I think around $200 a piece. And they're 10 feet wide, so they give you enough space. If you get a small one, you're going to have to stand up so close because otherwise your camera is going to show where the backdrop ends. So it's good to get a wide one. This is 10 feet wide, 8 feet tall, so it's plenty big for me to be in front of and still have some space. You don't want to be right up against it. So these have served well, and I've got another backdrop we'll talk about in another video. It's actually just a green sheet or a green piece of fabric, and it's called a green screen, and there's a lot of things you can do with a green screen. But before we end the video, let's go into another room in our house, and I'll show you where I use a couple of other sets. Well, if you've watched many of my videos, you have seen me in this chair. In fact, I think I've done all my interviews sitting in either this chair or another one at this computer. Actually, when I started out doing interviews, you'll see me in what looks like the same setup, but it was over at our apartment. We've moved to a house, and I set this side of my office up exactly the same, so we'd have continuity and it would look the same. But this is where I like to do my interviews and sometimes some other things as well. I remember I did one video back in the apartment days where I had to tear everything apart and set it up, and there was a problem with the video. After doing about a 20-some minute video, I looked at it on the computer. It was faulty, it was flawed, I couldn't use it, and I just didn't have the strength. I'd already put our living room and dining room back together again. I had no strength to tear it all apart and turn it into a video studio, so I just sat here next to my computer and did the video. In fact, it's the one where I talk about why do I have the right to talk about diabetes at all, and I'm sure some of you have seen that. So this makes a nice set, and I've got a light right over here. I don't know if you can see it, but if not, I'll get a picture that I can just turn on and turn off very easily. There's no setup involved. The only setup is to just flip a switch. I've got this light over here that I do move out from the wall and point it at me, and I'm good to go. So this is a very fast setup for me in cases where I don't have a lot of time. And this is another of my sets. It's basically a recliner. This is where I read the Bible. This is where I sometimes put on some music and talk to the Lord, but it's also where I do intros and outros for the videos sometimes. So, you can make use of some very simple areas. Again, it's a very fast setup. I've got one light that all I have to do is flip on. I've got the other light that I just move into place, have my mic on, set my camera, and I'm off to the races. So these are two sets in this office area that can be put together and taken down so quickly. So you don't have to have a big house. You don't have to have a big studio to get started. And I surely didn't. So to sum up, while you don't need to spend a fortune to get the latest, greatest gear, you don't want poor lighting or lousy video or stupid-looking backgrounds to detract from your message. Like the illustration we started with about the audio guy at the back of the church, you want your video, your lighting, and your background to at least be good enough so that people don't find it so unattractive they forget about your message, or they figure you just can't possibly have anything intelligent to say with such a poor, sloppy, fuzzy video. And of course, you want good audio as well, but we'll talk about that in an upcoming video. Okay, that's about it. Much of what I've been talking about is not strictly necessary. You don't have to use all the gear I do. For the beginning of a YouTube channel, you can get by with a cell phone, some natural light coming from a window, and using your living room as your video set. And if that's all you can afford to do, then that's what you do. But if you do have some extra money to invest in some equipment like I've been describing, it may or may not be worth it, depending on your goals, your ambitions, and just how important the message is that you'll be sharing. I'll put some links in the description to some of the gear I've been discussing, and you can check them out if you're interested. God bless. See you again soon.